you have to prioritize rest. You need to prioritize doing stuff that isn't work. And if you do get it right, it will actually benefit your business as well, which is the other thing to talk about here. So when we talk about healthy performance and everything else, it's because there is so much value to taking a step out of your day to day, to focus in on other stuff that interests you, and to focus in on relationships, because you get so much joy out of all that stuff. It will benefit your business as well. You will have more ideas and you will enjoy what you do more, because you're keeping that battery topped up with other stuff. So I think we put a lot of emphasis on how good we need to be at work, but the human body and brain is a tool, and it needs to be exercised and treated as such. And if you can optimize it and optimize and life and everything else to balance that out, it will make you better at work as well.
Our featured speaker today is the managing director at Feelgood. With nearly a decade of concept marketing experience, Richard leads his passionate team to improve workplace culture using creative solutions rooted in behavior change science. Richard, it's a pleasure to have you as our featured guest today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your journey with us.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. It's a great privilege to be here amongst other great guests and everything else that have come before me. And kudos to you both for setting up this really, really cool initiative. And it's a great opportunity for me to join Discord for the first time, which is always fun.
Well, welcome. As I said before, I definitely thought you were a seasoned pro at Discord, so you fake it well. I was wondering if you
Thank
could
you.
lead us off, just kind of taking us back in your journey and talking about some of your early life experiences or some of the people that you feel really shaped who you've become personally, professionally, or both.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have to say, when you mentioned a decade of experience in marketing, a small part of me died. I could not believe that it has been over 10 years I've been working specifically just in marketing as well. And I'm like, my God, time is a cruel mistress.
I was thinking that was impressive, just so you know.
I was impressed. I was like, I've been doing something for 10 years. I have a habit of swapping, changing, moving around and exploring new things quite rapidly. So I was like, I have done something for more than 30 minutes. It's a nice accomplishment. My journey into where I am now has been incredibly bizarre. I'm kind of one of those people that's stumbled around all over the place and found myself in a completely bizarre part of the market in mental health and well-being, and even in marketing as well. So when I set out from uni, I was a history student, very, very much into everything that had kind of gone before, and I thought that's what I was going to be doing. And then found myself falling in love with the world of journalism. Started really my professional career just in writing, and then environmental journalism, where I stumbled into the world of activist journalism. So I worked for a anti-oil, anti-energy, fossil fuel magazine called Desmog, I think it was called. And I worked for quite a radical editor that was obsessed with bringing down climate deniers, so climate change deniers, all being funded by Nigella Lawson's dad, which is Lord Lawson, who is quite an influential climate change denier Tory donor. So I spent a good solid amount of time, my first kind of professional job, just trouncing around the north of England, going into his land, trying to find clues from his local community that we could use. It was my first kind of introduction into that world of journalism, which is incredibly interesting. I was very fortunate. After that, just kind of moved into content marketing. It was just good copywriting, an interesting space at the moment where, I don't know, with the world of AI, people are starting to value good writing. And you asked before what kind of people have defined me now. I have to say, working for a former Daily Mail journalist, where you are really someone stood next to you as you're writing, and then they'll hit you with a ruler in the kind of metaphorical sense if you get any kind of grammar mistakes wrong. And the use of a comma would result in being shouted at. You do kind of learn out of it some form of self-discipline and resilience to pretty crazy leaders and things like that. So off the back of that, I've actually launched a couple of my own magazines. So a big passion of mine is music, and in particular underground kind of movements. So when I moved down to London, I was very keen on wanting to meet a lot of my heroes and bands and art and fashion and everything else. So I created my own magazine to do that. I put myself as editor, which means you can walk in any establishment really if you just give yourself the title of editor. Everybody welcomes you in, especially when it's great parties and stuff like that. I managed to, I think, over about a year, set up so it's a digital publication called Nightmare. We wanted a pretty crazy name. I actually managed to get that partnered up with South Bank University, so I needed writers. Obviously, had no money to pay for any of that, so pitched it to South Bank Uni. They invited me in to do a big talk to their journalism department. So I found myself suddenly having to, I had a full-time job as well as a writer. I had to go out, sneak out at lunchtime, go to the university, and I put on a turtleneck because I wanted to come across as quite, interesting and smart and Steve Jobs like. I had to go up on stage, and it was the first time I've ever done public speaking, so it was absolutely terrifying. And I had to pitch my magazine, and we had it on the massive screen right behind me on the stage. And I remembered, I didn't realize at the time, but my sub-editor had just published the new article, and there was just this huge swear word of like fuck just on this screen behind me, just spinning. And as I was talking to all these journalists about student journalists about serious writing and everything else, and it was just going on behind me. So I've kind of run magazines. I partnered up with the university, which was really cool. Slowly made my way into marketing. And I think, people who can heavily influence you, I have to say, is, your employers, leaders at work, they really can have a huge impact on what you do. So I've had very bad bosses who have very negatively impacted me, and I've had very good bosses who have very positively impacted me. And I think that's where I've started to really fall in love with the area that I'm in now, which is all around people, leadership training and culture and stuff like that. So I've had a very bizarre route over to where I am now, which is great. But I think, it's why I love the concept of this whole piece. I think having a little bit of, I think we should always push yourself to found something, to build something, to do a project, because that is where you tend to learn the most. And I think if you can, especially when you're younger, if you can acquire as many different skill sets as possible as you go, it will help infinitely in the world of business, right the way from good copywriting to learning to say no, to be able to stand up on stage in front of people with a massive fuck behind you kind of spinning around. If you can do all of that, you can do pretty much anything. Precarious but interesting kind of arc from journalism, environmental activism to the world of marketing. And then, where I am now, which is managing a wonderfully passionate team, as you said, as we kind of disrupt the world of training.
Awesome. You make a brilliant point about building something of your own. It forces you to exercise skill sets that you don't have otherwise, right? Like when you've always been working on someone else's ambitions or in that someone else's dreams, you can sort of exercise the skills that they specifically want from you, but you don't develop those extra skills that maybe sometimes don't seem that valuable, but in the right circumstance are incredibly valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point.
I think with the development of skills as well, I think there's a horrible kind of cliche around this. And in my wise old years now, I have really learned that cliches are there for a reason. There really is a lot of truth in a cliche, I find. Learning of skills, you've got obviously education, you can do courses, you can do boot camps or whatever, but really on the ground experience, learning it in an environment, having to be pushed and forced to have to learn to do something, to fix something, I think is absolutely the best way to harvest and gather skill sets in this. So pushing yourself to create something also, I think, not only gives you skills, but empathy through that whole journey that you can't get if you just remain an employee for your whole life, which is absolutely fine. Many of us are destined for that and they take great pride in that and everything else. To create anything, even if it's a simple little project or something, you learn so much around the precarious, nightmarish nature of having to do something from scratch. It's horrifying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it is horrifying and exhilarating and everything all at once,
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned, obviously, I want to dig deeper into Feelgood. I think talking about that is going to be super interesting. But just before that, because you mentioned in your previous answer about how you've had good bosses and bad bosses. And now I happen to know you are a boss and someone that I think is, from what I've heard, quite a good boss. So I'd like to hear
Thank God.
from you. What a compliment, right? What a compliment. I'd love to hear from you what you think makes a good boss a bad boss and how one can evaluate themselves in that position, because that's so important to entrepreneurship. Do my employees hate me? That's a big question.
Something I found to be really rare is what you kind of said at the end there. So the ability to be able to evaluate yourself. Holy shit, just it's a character type. So a lot of bosses, they are a boss because they're the best at what they do. So within an organization, they are promoted because they're performing the best. That's the most normal way to do it. But actual leadership qualities, what I believe and what we know is backed by research and things, a good manager and a good leader is they tend to not be the most technically proficient people. What they are very good at is understanding people, what they need, and ensuring that they have the environment to do what they need to do. So everybody loves the Steve Jobs comparison. So, why was Steve Jobs so good at what he did? He wasn't building the iPhones. He wasn't doing any of that. He understood people, and he also understood how to get the best out of all the agencies and all the marketing and all the engineers that are around him. He knew how to get the best out of them and create the environment to build the products that he had that vision to kind of see and wanted. That is very much the case if you're in a tiny organization to a huge organization. Good leadership really comes down to just caring, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the people around you, and giving them and empowering them to be able to crack on with that. I should know more about the science of it. This is the world that we live in, but again, that's not my job. I employ far smarter people to have all of that. But we know the research tells us that human beings, they need to be empowered to crack on. They need to be trusted to be able to do it. And you also need to be there for them when it all goes wrong, to lift them back up again and keep them going. So building cultures that are designed around empathy, empowerment, autonomy are really good ingredients to success. And I think we're still not quite there yet in society where we can replace everybody with robots. And I'm interested about, what challenges are going to kind of come out of that as well. Human beings really do need just to feel psychologically safe, to be trusted by those around them, to be believed in by their bosses. It's all a little bit kind of parenty in some ways. I try to avoid that as much as possible, but you really do have to care about people. And I think that's something that I have managed to instill in every company I've worked in and every opportunity I've had to lead, is that I will always give people enormous kind of empathy, trust, and because I think people genuinely, they want to do the best that they can at all times. I think you have to work pretty hard to create a toxic culture where people don't want to do the best that they possibly want to do. Like, good work is genuinely makes you happy. To achieve stuff makes you happy. It's from the immediate get-go in life, you want to succeed and you want to do your part in the team and everything else. And I just think it's amazing when you just walk into a company and you meet leaders who just don't get that. And they believe that people are idiotic, or, I'm reading, this is a great book. It's a very simple book to read, but, Surrounded by Idiots. It's a big bestseller at the moment. And it's the concept of leaders who believe that they are surrounded by idiots, and how fundamentally wrong that whole concept is. It's just about understanding who's in your team and bringing out their strengths. And it's actually very easy to do. Just care.
Absolutely. Thank you for the book plug too, because we generally ask for book recommendations. So Spencer's going to share that with our community too.
That's an easy one.
That's really great. And it's one I've not read, so I'm excited about it too. I really loved you taking us through your background and your career. I honestly give you all the credit, coming from that kind of journalism world where you said you're literally like under the ruler for comma, and taking that and really learning what makes a good management style, what makes a good company culture, and now getting the chance to implement that. So, as I understand it, and feel free to correct me, Feelgood's mission is, to transform companies from the inside out, to trying to help people think, feel, and perform at like their optimal best. So, what do you feel is the magic formula for improving employee engagement and then simultaneously company productivity? Because I feel like when I look at it, it's sort of like this balancing scale. If you give, and maybe I'm wrong to think this, but if you give people too much vacation time and too much play time, then they're not actually going to have the time and energy to do the things the company needs them to do. So how do you see that? What do you think is like the magic behind that?
It's a very, very good question. And it's one that we, as an organization, battle with and explore pretty much on a daily rate. So the easiest cop out of that answer is to say it's not the same for any organization. It really depends on a lot of different factors. But I think where we've managed to we're trying to simplify our thinking as much as possible. And I'm probably going to butcher this equation, but it's healthy people plus healthy leaders equals healthy performance organization that we as a company are essentially trying to build and trying to encourage our clients to build. That's our whole kind of mission statement. And I've definitely butchered that. And my principal psychologist is going to come after me for it. So we fundamentally, if you can work in an organization as an employee that empowers you and provides the autonomy and the right skills and the right kind of backing to acquire new skills, as one part of the puzzle. So in regards to whatever industry you work in, if you create an environment where you are, as I was saying earlier, just empowering your people to get on with their job and providing with the skills they need to learn and continue to better their performance at their job, and also provides a culture where they have the autonomy, respect, and empathy to thrive, that's a huge part of the puzzle. Now, the big thing that's going to destroy that in any capacity is the leadership. If you have one toxic boss or one leader that's trying to micromanage or is creating cultures of fear, is playing politics, all this kind of stuff, then it's going to start to really undermine all of that, because there's plenty of kind of research out of it. You know, a bad boss has a greater impact on your mental health and well-being than family, about parents, like everything. It's huge, because especially in our society, you gain a lot of meaning in yourself and value from what you do at work. And so how your leader perceives you and how you interact with your leader can be absolutely huge. And that's why, you know, I was mentioning in my past, I've had good and bad bosses. You know, when I mentioned bad bosses, they've had a real negative impact on my own sense of meaning and value and everything else, because that is society that we live in. That's where we get our value from, is work and everything else. So if you can get those two things right, then you're already leagues ahead of so many companies. So what Feelgood does is it supports organizations on 3 different layers. We'll support on strategy, policy, process. So what is the framework? What is the kind of mechanisms that that help that organization to exist and do stuff? That can be HR policy to all sorts of different areas, right the way down to on a team-based level. So we can look at the culture that is within teams and the individuals that make that up. So we're doing some really cool, starting to explore some very cool stuff around personality and how you can match up and get the best out of different personality groups and everything else. And then right the way down to the individual. So the individual can actually be one of the hardest nuts to crack, because that comes down to what they value, to what motivates them. There's a huge issue at the moment in the world of mental health and well-being, where there's just loads of money being spent on it, but employees don't want to do it. They don't want to engage with it. You know, they might find the training to be boring and everything else. Really, it can actually come down to what you value, because, you know, I don't believe that everybody's attention span is really that bad. Yes, it's definitely changed, but it's just what people value. Some people are very happy to sit down and watch a blockbuster for 3.5 hours in the cinema because they all love Lord of the Rings, but they don't want to attend a 30-minute webinar or workshop that's really focused on improving their health. That's not that hard to kind of get, because people don't value it that much because they don't really know that much around it. And I think that's a huge part of what we do as an organization as well, is that we're really trying to get people to understand the value of it and how it's so good for your performance, for your relationships, for how you exist. So I would say the most simple kind of magic formula that we're trying to express to all clients and organizations is that create the culture, make sure you've got the leaders in place to do it, and start to really push employees to value this stuff for themselves. You can really start to shift that needle. What we're trying to do is make that as easy as possible. We're bringing the best experts, facilitators, everything directly to the people, supporting on strategy, and creating these incredible learning experiences for people, which are genuinely really very good, interactive, interesting, the whole lot.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much.
Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show.
We did have a question from one of the audience members, Giovanni. He wanted to ask, how, in your opinion, do you align mission and vision of a company? Now, I just want to add a little bit more onto that, where Feelgood does these amazing things to like make it so that you can still get a lot out of your employees, but they actually are enjoying themselves and are engaged with the work and everything. So what is the key advice you think that you've seen has a positive impact on, engagement at the companies you've worked with?
Yeah, it's an incredibly tricky one.
That's what I try and bring,
But
just make it impossible.
it's really, these are the big questions. I mean, the reason why I struggle to answer it immediately is because it comes down to what people value themselves. So you can't force employees to just align with your vision or mission of a business, because sometimes they just really don't care. They care about what's going on in their world, their family, their friends, their whole piece, and a job to them is a job to them. But I do think there's a huge benefit to having a very clear alignment of why the company exists in the first place and how that can benefit individuals. So we're working on a big project for a huge firm at the moment, a huge law firm, where that is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to align the whole existence of the organization with the values that they're trying to instill for their hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. And they're trying to link those values directly to benefits for the individual. So their values are around culture, around how they interact with one another, to the value of well-being, to all this client philosophy. And the why they've approached us is they're trying to directly link that with a benefit for the employee. And it's really difficult to do because it's not very naturally there. Because fundamentally, the company exists to make money. And it's basically like, we need you to work as hard as possible to make more money for the business. So how do you kind of create something that is truthful to that is honest? Because you can't make up values anymore that are around, I don't know, we want everybody to thrive, or we just want to change the world. It's not, everyone knows why we're here. We're here to make a lot of money and to, maximize billable hours. So how can we create values that are aligned with individual values as also with collective values? And how they're treating them is actually, so they're trying to change the definition of those values and how we interpret those values, which is a really cool exercise to do. So, we're exploring things around how individuals interact with one another and how teams interact with one another. A key value will be that needs to be around empathy, or that needs to be around autonomy, because that will benefit the business, but it will also benefit you and your individual well-being and mental health, and also performance. That's the exercise we're kind of going through. So my advice around creating values and trying to align that with a mission is be very, very authentic in what you're trying to get out of those values, but make them as relatable and as beneficial to the individual employee as possible. And don't try and bullshit with any kind of fluffy big words now, because people they're kind of done with it. And I think that's what makes it so tricky. Or don't have values at all, which is what a lot of companies are doing, and avoiding them completely, because there's been a lot of bad stuff around it. It's really tricky. It's really tricky, and I don't pretend to have the answers. We're going down this whole exercise with them now, and we're trying out all these different. So we're bringing in little focus groups, and we're going to trial it out with different departments. We're hoping to build a business case to solidly prove that these new values that we're building and this new kind of mission statement is actually good for the output of this team, so that it will then win over the rest of the company, because people just don't believe them anymore. There's been too much kind of bullshit values and stuff like that. So it's very, very tricky. And the best thing, I could advise is just to experiment, keep it very authentic, and align it as much as possible with how it will benefit the individual employee and the collective as well.
I feel like I can very much relate to what you're sharing too. Just at the last big company that I worked at, when they would change CEOs, they would also change the mission and value statements, and they would make bracelets about it, and they would have us memorize it. And really, I enjoyed the culture of the office, environment that I worked with, the group of people that I worked with. And I think our manager did a great job with that culture. But the corporate culture, as you're kind of talking about, like that is what really sucked. I can tell that like your experiences have built that empathy in you, but I know as someone that works with individuals trying to change behavior, that sometimes it's hard to sell people on those sorts of concepts. So, are there like specific metrics that you show companies that kind of help them envision, the productivity that they're going to get so that you can come in and say, okay, but really it's about, building culture and this will get like, I guess, what is the selling point and how difficult is it to sell to companies in that way, if you don't mind me wording it that way?
This is actually reflective of the transition that Feelgood is going through at the moment. So our background of well-being, mental health, there's still a lot of negative connotation around what well-being means, what mental health is. And for us, again, tying into why companies are here, why they exist, they're here to make money. And they're here to get the most out of their people as possible. By reframing the whole conversation around the fact that by taking care of all of these different factors, by bringing in autonomy, empathy, all these great stuff, mastery, the skills, the output of that per employee, so that productivity piece. And it's not just about productivity, it's about keeping people for longer. So one of the most expensive things organizations can go through is recruitment. It takes an enormous amount of resource to recruit the right kind of people. It's actually a hell of a lot cheaper to keep them. So by building cultures where people do want to stay loyal to it, do want to stick around, are supported, they can see the trajectory of things, then it's always going to be better for the bottom line fundamentally. And then, so how we sell it in, I mean, case studies from the work that we've done in our current clients to what we think at the beginning we're referencing one of our big podcast series that we're running at the moment. So it's called Reasons to be Radical. It's all focused in on law firms and the world of law, which is one of the trickiest industries on the planet because you're faced with essentially lawyers who have to do two jobs in one day. They have billable hours, all client facing work, and then they have to do any management and additional stuff after that. And that would be 7 hours a day just on the billable piece and then everything else after that. So by coming in and saying you need to do kind of less of that and more of this other stuff over here because that's going to be really good for productivity, it's a really hard sell and it really struggles with it. We're working with leaders in big firms that have put our kind of methodology at the heart of what they do. And they have become some of the most profitable departments in those firms because they've built that loyalty piece. They've built the right skills in place to kind of keep going in this healthy performance piece, so the sustaining performance over longer. It actually becomes a much more easier sell. But the good news is a lot of this is starting to come into the next generation of leader. It's a lot, this is language that people are getting a lot more used to. They know that, you can't treat people as robots. You can't just kind of push people to the extreme. We're seeing more and more cases of burnout is massively impacting organizations. It's impacting countries because the amount of money that's lost every year in the economy down to people just burning out. I mean, people underestimate the impact of burnout. It's vast. It can change you forever. We're dealing with leaders who have experienced burnout. I've experienced versions of it. And it still impacts me to this day. It's better for the bottom line if you can build especially in this audience, if we're building companies from scratch and we're at that kind of small to medium level, building all this stuff in from the get-go will be better for the long term in that company. You're going to keep people for longer. The productivity of people is going to be up. You're going to create environments where people aren't going to burn out. They're going to healthily sustain their performance for longer. And that is how people should be kind of approaching this. It's good all round. And that's a lot of what we do as an organization. So I really do recommend digging into this law series that we're doing because you're actually hearing it from these incredible leaders in a profession that is so difficult to be able to add in more stuff to a very packed schedule, and how they're actually bringing a lot of our methodology into what they do. And the output of that is phenomenal.
I think there's a propensity to sort of diminish burnout as something that happens to people, maybe weak people or something like that. And there's a quote from a movie, Loving Vincent, which is about Vincent van Gogh. And the quote is like a younger guy talking to an older guy. And the older guy says something about like, this life destroyed this guy, or this guy burnt out, sort of equivalent. And the young guy says, oh, that happens if you're weak. And the older guy says, live longer. Life can tear apart even the strong. And I think that's so meaningful, where it's like, no matter how strong you are, life can get worse than you can imagine. And burnout can absolutely tear you apart. And I think that's super, super important to be willing to acknowledge that it's like, it's not just something that happens to some people, it can happen to the best person you know in your life. And it is very prevalent in the entrepreneurial community that we're focused on, where entrepreneurs will work for like insane hours for 5 years or something. And then they get to the peak they've been working towards and they can't enjoy it or be happy about it at all because they're so incredibly burnt out. So I would ask you, what do you think is like the approach to achieve incredible things, but not destroy yourself in the process?
Um, it's a so
An easy question.
the big questions on this. So experiencing a form of burnout myself, and I say a form because it really can come in lots of different ways. So when you actually experience a negative mental health, as well poor mental health, time in your life, so anything from depression to anxiety disorders, you start to learn just how vulnerable being a human being is, because as soon as the mind starts to work against you, play tricks on you, it can, I don't know, it changed my perspective on how much I push myself to the extreme. So on one of the guests that we interviewed on our series, a chap called Richard Martin, who's now the CEO. So he was a very big, powerful lawyer, very big, powerful partner at his big global firm, and he was very influential and deeply respected and everything else. He was actually on holiday with his family. So he's got his wife next to him in the car and his kids in the back. He's driving down the motorway and suddenly just blacks out, finds himself walking across the motorway, across opposing traffic and the whole lot coming at him, with his kids still in his kids still in the car and his wife, kind of losing her mind around all. And he's just coming to on the motorway with the French police suddenly walking towards him, and suddenly finds himself in hospital. And his journey of burnout is absolutely terrifying. And it should be a huge warning sign to anybody who is pushing themselves constantly to the max, that you need to be very, very wary of how pushing that battery down. Because when you experience something like that, and when I burnt myself out, it's a very precarious time in the business. We were working through a lot of big stuff, a lot of big changes. And I went from being who I am, very outgoing, very confident, and suddenly suffering anxiety attacks, going down into the tube. And I still get it today. So I'm now claustrophobic, going down into the tube, overpacked trains, going underground, all this stuff still causes me huge anxiety because I suffered burnout. And you do something, just snaps, and it is absolutely terrifying. And we have to be aware of our limits. We have to invest in looking after ourselves and creating buffers. So I was actually earlier just reading about the founder of Netflix. He's had a thing every single week, every single Tuesday. His day ends at 5 p.m. and he goes and spends that evening with his wife, and they do whatever they want. It's their date night, family night, whatever they want to do. And he's had that since day one of the company, because he saw so many other startup founders just completely push themselves into the ground, burn out, lose their wives, lose their husbands, have no relationship with their children. And they go through 7 startups, 7 different relationships, 7 different families, obviously not, but, constantly kind of just pushing themselves to the extreme because they're chasing the goal of that big kind of success. And what do they have left? It's just them and their but no relationship. And those relationships with family, with spouse, with everything is what provides so much more depth, meaning, and richness to life as a human being than the work and the output there. And this isn't true for absolutely everybody. Some of us find all of our value in what we do and everything else, and that's completely okay. But you can have the best of both worlds. You can have your cake and eat it. And I think you have to prioritize rest. You need to prioritize doing stuff that isn't work. And if you do get it right, it will actually benefit your business as well, which is the other thing to talk about here. So when we talk about healthy performance and everything else, it's because there is so much value to taking a step out of your day-to-day to focus in on other stuff that interests you, and to focus in on relationships, because you get so much joy out of all that stuff. It will benefit your business as well. You will have more ideas and you will enjoy what you do more, because you're keeping that battery topped up with other stuff. So I think we put a lot of emphasis on how good we need to be at work, but the human body and brain is a tool, and it needs to be exercised and treated as such. And if you can optimize it and optimize and life and everything else to balance that out, it will make you better at work as well. So I just think it's a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer.
I appreciate you taking us through that, and not only as a tool, but maybe more like my robot vacuum. It needs time to recharge and just be on
Got
its
to clean the
own.
filter out.
That one's for Spencer. I do have a shark vacuum. I think I really relate to what you're sharing. And I'm thinking in my head, I know that I still advise people to be better about work life balance than I am myself. So I kind of want to turn it to you and just ask, like, how do you find your balance in your work and family life, and everything else you're passionate about? Like, what does that look like for you now? Because clearly you've been a person that has done multiple things at once as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that really clicked with me is I don't massively, and it gets thrown at me all the time, but I still do think there is meaning in this. I don't believe that there should be such a separation between work and life. I think there is just your life. And I think I'm very fortunate that the way that I'm hardwired and the way that I exist is I find an enormous amount of meaning in what I do within my work. So it provides huge joy for me. I do think that we shouldn't work so hard to separate the meaning of our work with our life, because I think it creates a lot of friction that makes it very difficult to find balance. And I always think, it's not always applicable see everybody, because some people work in the worst industries ever. But I don't know, I think there is ways of finding meaning in what you do that will actually make life a hell of a lot easier. It could be I'm working for my family, I'm working to save, I'm working to do all that kind of stuff. That is a lot of meaning in why you do what you do. And I think removing such a hard difference between what is life and what is work, I think is really beneficial. But that doesn't mean that you can't be protecting your time outside of work, which is where, as I was kind of referencing earlier. For me personally, I find a lot of joy in doing lots of creative stuff. So for me, it's photography. I've tried to write short films. And I say, again, like I fail at all of this. But the process of doing this stuff is very good for me. For example, I took my partner's Swiss, so when I took the opportunity of going up to a Swiss mountaintop, writing a short movie about like a horror, and I filmed it all on my phone, and I learned during that process so much around what phones can do, filming, gimbals, the whole lot, which I now bring into my work as well. So anything through creativity is a big kind of recharger for me, and it massively helps me at work as well. And I do a lot of we do a lot of production and all sorts of stuff. Feelgood. So the more I can learn there, the better. Music, writing, films, all the standard kind of white man stuff that you see on everybody's kind of profiles. Yeah, I find a lot of joy in that. And also cooking, all that great stuff. But I'm also I do believe in, if I find myself many times throughout the week working until incredibly late, working over weekends, I think it's important that you find the time to take that time back a little bit and do stuff that isn't work related, because I just can't do it. I can't do it as much as I used to be able to do it. I just run out of steam. I realized you have to invest a little bit more in that recharge time, whatever that might be. I've got a great cat now. Cats are good for recharging as well. It is important finding that kind of balance. But I do believe if you can find a lot of meaning in your work, you don't have to work so hard on that balance. And I think that's something that Sinek said once as well, which I don't kind of agree with it, but no, I really do agree with that. I think it's good.
A easy way to Nancy in my heart is a quote by Simon Sinek. So that's great. I didn't know you'd done short films, but I do think now I know what our next dinner night we'll have to watch. You, me, Emma, and Jess. That's going to be great. Can't wait.
I can't say they're any good, but I certainly enjoyed running around the snow.
That's not a requirement. Good is not a requirement. Don't you worry. I've done a lot of not good in my life, so
and you need to do it. You need to do it, especially. I think there's way too much focus on trying to get everything perfect, and it's a horrible cliche as well. But really, the journey is normally way more important than output of whatever you're working on. And I have to really encourage people to just do stuff that they have no idea how to do. They're worried around what that output is going to be. Just don't worry about that. It really is the actual working it out, experimenting, doing different stuff. So when I set myself the challenge of, I want to do a short film because I love film. Oh my God. Oh my God. The writing was terrible. My filming was abysmal. I didn't know how to use anything. I fell over in the snow 1,000 times. But you know what? The 1 minute of footage that I got for the trailer, love it.
That's all you need. That's all you need. That's brilliant.
Exactly.
So what I did want to dig into a little bit more is about like how you decide on customers, because a big learning in entrepreneurship is the ability to say no and say like, actually, we don't want to work with these guys because of A, B, or C. How do you tell early on, like, this is not a good customer for us?
Yeah, God, that is one of the, it's a very, very difficult and challenging kind of piece because obviously when you're running a business and when you're trying to grow a business and you have targets and everything else, the thought of saying no to a potential invoice is absolutely horrifying. What we've started to do, which has been really good, is looking at the actually I'll turn it into more of a case study. So a younger Feelgood. So, about 3 years ago, we decided as an organization that we wanted to change the customer type. So the type of work that we were doing, to kind of project that we were doing, because ultimately what we wanted to do as an organization was create much bigger impact. So the older version of Feelgood, all we did was singular workshops. A company would, sign up to 12 workshops. They would run, once a month over the year, and that was our normal clientele base. We had a bunch of them, but then COVID came along. Like many industries, it just completely chucked it out of the water because, our normal workshop type is a virtual Zoom style kind of webinar. And everybody experienced Zoom fatigue and they became incredibly disengaged with attending webinars. And who the hell wants to attend training, a 1 hour training session over your lunch break? This actually undermines what we were trying to do in the first place. So what we wanted to do was to move away from that client base and start to do much more strategic work for organizations. So we wanted to understand, what else was kind of going on around it. Why were they coming to us in the first place? What were the actual cultural challenges? What were their leaders doing? And what could we do to solve these challenges? So we had to start talking to a different kind of client and say no to these other kind of clients because they still took a lot of time to manage and everything else. But being a small team, how we spend our time has become, it's a huge thing for us because if we invest our tiny amount of time in the wrong thing, it can actually be really detrimental to us as a business. So we've become a lot more strategic in that. So we've made it very clear around the kind of client that we with be my first inclination. So my first kind of recommendation there: are they wanting to create genuine impacts? Are they aware of the challenge in their organization as well? So a huge issue for us is, you have people in charge of generating the and solving the problems aren't actually aware of what's causing the problems, and they might be lying to themselves. So you've got, I think it's called like confirmation bias or something. We're talking to HR teams and everything else. They have all the best intentions of the world, but they're coming to us because there's still a challenge. There's still something wrong. And they might find themselves responsible and they should be solving, downplay, believe it's caused by something else. And we have to kind of work with them to understand and fully map that as well. So for us, it's around their own understanding of their own organization, their desire and the kind of change that they want to do, the scale of the program, the understanding of where that problem's coming from. So there's two kind of main factors now. So we started to say no to organizations that, just want to do a little bit of a plaster. And we started to say yes to companies that really want to generate much bigger change. And that transition for us has been horrifying, to say the least, because we've had to, and I keep, it's my favorite word, but for nerds, so everybody in businesses, when it goes wrong or change, it's terrifying, the whole thing. But we now have a new kind of client base where we are working a lot more strategically with them. We're supporting them on much bigger projects, much bigger aims and objectives. So that change has been very painful, very horrifying, but unbelievably rewarding. So I have to say, just keep kind of going.
Well, even though it was a painful kind of series of changes, I really appreciate you describing it to us because, as Spencer said, it's a difficult thing. It's hard to find that balance between needing that paycheck and then also wanting to yourself kind of cultivate that company culture where these are the types of customers that we invite into our space that we work with, so we can keep doing what we do. Because as you've indicated, like that energy is kind of a back and forth trade-off.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And I think we found that because of we hire our staff are, psychologists. They're really smart people, and they need new stuff to work on, and they need stuff that stretches their minds. Otherwise, they get bored. So if we're working with clients and it's very just turnover, it's the same shit, they just get bored and they'll leave and they'll go somewhere else. And so it's also, we want to be working with clients that want to have that kind of relationship where they're going to be doing different stuff, and it's the dream. And so we've worked very hard to cultivate that relationship with our clients because it's good for us and it's good for them. It's a very, very tricky thing to do. And again, it's because obviously, you've got to pay bills, you've got to pay salaries, you've got to keep the lights on, you've got to do all this other stuff. You can't allow that to prevent you from executing on a vision which is going to be very, very good for the business. And I think that's a big difference as well between kind of short-term leadership and much longer-term leadership. You've got to have that view in mind and then keep going, even when everything is on fire, the boat is creaking, the water's coming in, everybody's screaming that we need to kind of go back and all that kind of stuff. And you just got to keep going. Nope, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And then, you're kind of there, which is that, you've got to have a bit of that risk factor in your personality to keep going, I think. But yeah.
Well, if you haven't already written a piece on this, I suggest you do, because you definitely have a great understanding about it.
Thank you. I'll add it onto my add it onto the creative list.
Yes. Thanks so much for taking extra time with us. I have one final question to you. I just wanted to ask, what words of wisdom or piece of advice would you like to leave us and our community with today?
I think coming from the space that I'm currently operating in around what does drive healthy performance, my own experiences in when it goes wrong, and the people that we support, there is no kind of greater thing. I can't influence the way what your business does or your products. I have no understanding of any of that. But what you have to do is prioritize your own well-being at the center of all of it, because if you can get it right, it's going to infinitely improve your business. It's going to improve your own existence. All of these things are connected, and they drive one another. So I would just say, take the time to understand what you need to operate at your best, build that into your routines, and protect it and value it more than anything else. Because if you can get that right, you'll then understand why you need to get that right for all of your team members as well. That really is, I believe, the equation for success in an organization. You can't control the market, you can't control what's going on out in the world, but you can control what is going on immediately around you. You do every day. And so if you can get that right, you can support your people a lot better, and it will improve your business as well.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Rich. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. We appreciate your thoughts and everything you've shared with us and taught us today. Thank you for joining us today, to everyone generally who's been a part of this discussion. And Nancy and myself and the rest of the team behind Founders Voyage feel fortunate to be a part of this community with you and for the opportunity to bring this cooperative learning experience to everyone every week. Obviously, Rich, please, if you have the time, we'd love it if you could join us and listen in for the next guest next week. And if you have any nominations of anyone else you'd like to hear from in one of our Saturday sessions, that would be absolutely phenomenal. Our podcast can be found on any podcasting platform or directly on the website, Founders Voyage. Now, Rich, let me roll out the red carpet for you. Is there anything you want to talk about, bring to our knowledge? How can people be in contact with you to be like, Rich, you're awesome? What's the
Best thing to do is just connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm very, very happy to support any entrepreneurs, any leaders, any individual insights around any of this that we've kind of discussed today. And also within the world of marketing to what Feelgood does, I'm very much happy to answer any questions and just to be there, because I think it is part of my own mission and also the collective mission of the company as well, to just help as many leaders as possible with this very, very tricky challenge, and to kind of adjust their thinking around it and see the value in it, because it will fundamentally lead to a better world, we hope. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn. To answer any questions or to have a chat, coffees, beers, all good. I'm here for it.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Rich.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much again.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.